I'd like to show you an article about demographic change in Germany, partly because it's fun in itself, but also to draw out some implications, to extend the numbers a bit further into the future, and also to say what the implications are. Now, here's the article. It's at Journalisten Watch, July 13th, so about 6 weeks old. Germany will not become more German. If almost every second child under the age of 10 in Germany has a migration background, then that is a dramatic and momentous change in the population structure. Only 15 years ago, this only applied to around 1 in 4 children. And this is Wolfgang Hübner. I don't know anything about him, haven't been able to find out anything about him. The pace of this radical upheaval has thus increased considerably, and all factors point to the fact that it will accelerate further in the future. This is the result of a study by the Federal Institute for Population Research, which was published on Monday. Okay, so Journalisten Watch, here's a Google Translate of the German Wikipedia page. In terms of content, the blog is sometimes viewed as right-wing populist to right-wing extremist and Islam critical. Well, if this article is right-wing extremist, I'd hate to meet the moderates. Now, something about the Federal Institute for Population Research, that's the article, that's the study that's referred to in this article. It looks like a nerdy, statist, number crunching organisation. It's got the little German eagle, so I think it's part of the federal German government. The Federal Institute for Population Research, BIB, examines the causes and consequences of demographic change and has the task of advising the federal government and the federal ministries on the basis of scientific research. Okay, so they don't look like right-wing extremists to me. So that's where the numbers come from. Now, basically, the carry-home message for the numbers is that I want to treat these numbers as round numbers. Almost, it says every second child, 1 in 2 children under the age of 10 in Germany are from a migrant background, and that applied 15 years ago. That figure was 1 in 4. Now, a migrant background, accordingly, people with a migration background include those who come from another country or have at least one parent who did not have German citizenship at birth. This currently applies to 22 million people in Germany. Now, this means that the figures, I haven't been able to find this study from the Federal Institute of Population Research. If anyone can see it, please drop a link in the comments or put in a search term, a Google search term to find it. I haven't been able to find it, so I'm just going to go with the numbers. And one caution with these numbers is that under that definition of a migration background, that can include non-invader populations. So it might not be all about people from the Middle East or Sub-Saharan Africa or the Indian subcontinent. So let me, to illustrate that, let's say a German woman came over to England and she and I got married and had a child and then went back to Germany. That child would be considered, I think wrongly, to be of a migration background. And I don't know, I wonder if it might be possible that that child's child might be considered of a migration background, because if that child was born in England, it might not have had German citizenship at birth. It would have had the right to it, but it might not have had German citizenship. So that suggests the numbers are not quite as bad as this study is making out. But on the other hand, I think that might be balanced up by the fact that there'll be quite a lot of invader populations, say from Morocco or Turkey or the Middle East, who have both of their parents, although they're from invader populations, that both parents had German citizenship at birth. So and they will not be counted. They'll be counted as German, as ethnic Germans for the purposes of this study. So I think it probably balances it out. So I feel okay taking these numbers at face value. Okay, now what I wanted to do is to look at the rate of growth of the migration population, as well as the rate of growth of the overall population. Now, to do that, I couldn't find anywhere demographic numbers, stats for under 10s anywhere. The German government, I don't know where this study, why it refers to under 10s. The German government seems to refer to under 14s. So this is, what I want to find out is the rate of growth. And if I can, this study here shows under 14s, so not under 10s but under 14s. But if I can assume that the rate of growth for under 10s is the same as the rate of growth for under 14s, which is probably a reasonably safe assumption because there isn't much difference between under 10s and under 14s, then that suggests if I can work out the rate of growth for under 14s, then I can work out the rate of growth for the under 10s. Okay, so the number in that study for under 14s I think would have come from 2021, because I think the 2022 numbers probably haven't been published yet. So this study here shows that in 2021 the total number of under 14s was 10.85 million. Go back 15 years, so that goes to 2006, and that the number of under 14s in 2006 was 10.6. So 10.6 million 15 years later became 10.85 million. Now that's, you have to take my word for it, I spreadsheeted that out. I'm not going to show the spreadsheet, it's too nerdy, too boring, take too long, but that's a growth rate of 0.15% a year. So somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2%, the overall growth rate of under 14s. I'll assume that the overall growth rate of under 10s is the same growth rate, 0.15%. Now, to go from 1 in 4 of the number in 2006, so to go from 1 in 4 of 10.6 to go to 1 in 2 of 10.85, that takes a growth rate of 4.85%. So assuming that the growth rates for under 10s are the same as for under 14s, then for under 10s to go from the migration background under 10s to go from 1 in 4 to 1 in 2 over that 15-year period, they would have to be growing by 4.8% per year, whilst the overall rate of growth of all under 10s is 0.15% a year. Okay, now the reason I've done that is to extend it out into the future a bit, and what I did was to say, well, what does that mean for people who were born in 2021 in Germany? And very rough and ready, what I did was to say, well, the average age, let's assume the average age of 0 to 10s is 5. Then if you want to find out the number of births, again, very rough and ready, what you do is you extend that growth rate, you extend that out by 5 years. So what you then, if you do that, what you find is the number of births in 2021 of a migration background was not 1 in 2, but 62%. So 62% of all births in Germany in 2021, according to those figures, again, we're extending out those figures, 62% of all births in Germany were of a migration background, i.e. that one of the parents did not have German citizenship at the time that baby was born in 2021. If you extend that out another 5 years into the future, this is the way with exponential progressions. If you extend it out another 5 years into the future, the number of German births that will be of migrant background will be somewhere between 75 and 80%. I made it 78%, but somewhere between 3/4 and 4/5 will be of a migrant background. Again, there are a whole load of assumptions there. For instance, one assumption is that foreign invader children are not shipped into Germany between the ages of 0 and 10. That probably happens sometimes, but I'm assuming or guessing that the pattern for invader births is generally the bearded fighting age male. He bullies his way into Germany, gets himself the right to remain, then he brings in a spouse from abroad, then he has children that are born in Germany, rather than starting a family out in the Middle East or Sub-Saharan Africa and bringing them all over and them all coming over in one go. I think that seems to me to be a reasonably safe assumption. I can't be certain, but anyway, so I'm going to go with those figures. I think the main problem that you might have with those figures is to say, oh come on, that's sensationalist. That's just a scare story to say that in 5 years' time, births in Germany of a migration background might be 3/4. Well, that is what happens. That's the way exponential progressions work. They seem like nothing for many years, decades, and suddenly they increase. A bit like you have a leak in your roof that's getting worse and worse and worse. First year it's a couple of drops a day, then that amount doubles and doubles, and eventually you have to put a bucket under the leak, and within a week after that you are completely flooded, washed out of house and home. That's the way exponential progressions work. It's best expressed and most frequently expressed by a quote from Ernest Hemingway, "The Sun Also Rises," where, and that's, I'll give you the quote here. There's an English fella talking about going bankrupt, and he's asked, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, 2 ways: gradually and then suddenly. I'll read it out because it's fun, but it's also kind of relevant. It's a good analogy. And this is this English fellow, you can imagine this with an upper-class English accent from the 1920s. "Frightfully good tailor, never believe it to see me now," Mike said. "I used to pay him £100 a year just to keep him quiet, so he wouldn't send me any bills. Frightful blow to him when I went bankrupt." It was right after the medals. They had an argument about medals. "Gave his letters rather a bitter tone. 'How did you go bankrupt?' Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said, gradually and then suddenly." That's an exponential progression. It's gradual, and then suddenly it hits and you're taken out of the game. So like this guy, he's incurring a load of bills that he can't afford. He keeps his tailor quiet and stops his tailor sending him or enforcing his bills by giving him £100 a year. And then suddenly it mounts up and the tailor wants paying and everyone else wants paying, and he can't borrow any more money from friends to pay off this, that or the other bill. All the bills, all the debts all come in at once, and suddenly he goes bankrupt. That's exponential progressions. You don't think they're anything much, you don't think they ever will be, and then suddenly they overwhelm you. Now, you might not want to believe that that's possible, but I think I can guarantee you that the enemy, they believe it's possible. They seem to understand those basic crude maths pretty well. Now, I want to play you this from Twitter. This video from Twitter. This is from Denmark, and it's about that fella in blue, the blue top there. That's a Pakistani. He's arguing with a Dane. He's basically saying to a Dane, "We're going to outbreed you. We're going to have lots of children, and we're taking over just by numbers, and we're going to exterminate you," is the word he uses. And all his mates are saying, "Yeah, that's right. We're going to exterminate you through numbers." Okay. I'll put a link to this tweet in underneath the video so you can look at it for yourselves. Muslims being racist towards Danes and taunting them about the Great Replacement in Denmark. So I'll play the first minute of this. The audio's poor quality. It doesn't matter. There are subtitles. I'll read some of them out. Yeah, we get 5 children, you get 1 and 2. In 10 or 15 years, there'll be no more Danes. Or there'll be more Danes, Pakis than Danes in Denmark. And then the other Muslim, he comes in and he says, "Yeah, I just got married, I'm going to have 5 kids tomorrow." The Danes are 5 million. Soon you will be exterminated, man. Look at Sweden. Look at the Norwegians. Look at the Finns. We are multiple millions, man. And then he goes on about how Danes fuck animals. That's rich coming from well, I don't want to say. Okay, so you might think that the catastrophe maths doesn't apply to you. Your enemy certainly does. Okay. Now, the main implication of this, these numbers, is that this is not an accident. This is deliberately being done by our governments. They want power. People in power tend to be addicted to power. They want it. And the bigger a state gets, particularly, and there's no bigger state than the welfare state, the big state welfare state. The bigger the state gets, the more it serves, the bigger any organisation gets, the more it serves the interests of the people who run it, rather than the people it's meant to serve. And that's really what's happened with our Western societies. They become very big, and the people who run those states have become addicted to the huge power that they have, and they want more of it. And one way to do that is to get rid of the sense, the traditional, the real sense of identity that nations have. It was settled centuries ago, at least a century ago. Probably the ultimate expression of this was during the Versailles Conference and Woodrow Wilson's 14-point plan, basically saying that racial and ethnic groups, they should form their own nations, they should form their own self-governing countries. That has gone out the window. That has been replaced by this idea that civil values, these are really what your country is about. And it's not about a nation, it's about communities, different communities. And that is deliberate. That is because it gives power to the politicians, because they can legislate to decide what those civil values are. They can enforce those civil values. They can't legislate to decide the characteristics of a race, in the same way they can't legislate to decide what the characteristics, whether the sky is green. It would be pointless for them to do so. And that in turn gives them a lot of power. That makes them very powerful. They decide what the sense of nationhood is. And it then increases their power by being able to they don't have to deal with a population who have a secure sense of their own identity, because people are dealing and identify with each other, with the people who think, speak, look and act like them, a cohesive group. They're dealing with warring different communities between whom there is a lot of friction, and who turn to government in order to try and solve, to settle the disputes between all the different groups. It gives those governments a lot of power, in the same way that parents get a lot of power over squabbling children. Divide and rule is another way of putting it. And also, particularly if you have very violent invader populations, like the man in that Danish Twitter video, then he's not so much violent, but very hostile, I should say, invader populations, then that grinds you down further, because that makes you live in fear and insecurity. Like young women in Cologne, who are probably a lot more reluctant to go out and celebrate New Year's Eve in the lustig way that Germans have traditionally enjoyed doing so and been very proud of. Suddenly they're going to feel a lot more scared about that, a lot more vulnerable. Who do they turn to protect them? But the state and agents of the state. It gives the state more power. And to that extent, I don't think it's much of an exaggeration to say that Western governments are not doing this by accident. It is occurring uniformly across all Western societies, run at full blast by our government authorities. And to that extent, I think it's a realistic analysis to say that Western governments treat their indigenous ethnic populations a little bit like the way Marx described the proletariat as being. This group, a productive group that you squeeze for wealth, you squeeze for money, you allow them to have just enough, or you try to make them believe you're giving them just enough that they don't revolt against it. We see this with the welfare state. Basically, we are putting up with this. We're allowing governments to do this to us for so long as we get welfare, primarily for so long as we get free medical health care. As long as that keeps coming, we will let governments do this. I think we will put up with that for as long as we continue to get free medical care. When the state and the welfare state break down, no more free medical healthcare for you. We will no longer put up with it, and we will then be forced to gather together, and I'll come to that in a little bit. What I want to do now is to refer to go back to the article and read the rest of the article, because I don't think he gets it. I think the writer of this article, he may be a right-wing extremist, but he has still bought this idea that it is civil values that count. It's the civil order that counts. There is a kind of a glass screen in front of us that we dare not break through. The other side of that are issues of ethnic and even to a certain extent racial identity. We're still scared to break through that. The authorities know we are. They're going to try as hard as they can to enforce against that. And we are even scared to see through it as well. And I think that fear, that blindness, affects the writer of this article. So I want to go back and look at this article. So if I go back here, where is this article? There we are, Journaliston Watch. So he describes what it means to be of a migration background. This currently applies to 22 million people in Germany. If the figures in the study are correct, this will have significant consequences, because then Germany will soon no longer be the land, this went through Google Translate by the way, no longer be the land of Germans, but predominantly German ancestors, with predominantly German ancestors, but an international settlement area with a steadily decreasing majority of German origins, which in a few decades will at best be the largest minority among several minorities. No, I think he's wrong there. Within a few decades, Germans might be one of the smaller minorities within Germany. That seems incredible. Well, certainly for people under 35, because of the figures that I gave you, the way that exponential progression, if that continues, I would guess that exponential progression is accelerating, if anything. I don't see signs of it slowing down. If that continues, with the migrant section of it increasing at the younger end, increasing at about 4.85, nearly 5%, whereas the overall population number increasing at or barely increasing at all, then very soon you will see, certainly for under 35s, that Germans are probably fewer than some other minorities, say sub-Saharan Africans or Middle Easterners or Turks, and I don't think they'll be the largest minority for several decades, if the current trend continues, which I don't think it will continue. That's the good thing. I think things will break down before then. However, everyone living in Germany will then have a German passport, a development that has been underway for a long time. I think what he means is if you can set foot in Germany, you get a German passport. Undoubtedly, these are not good prospects for supporters of an ethnically homogeneous nation. Well, that's not saying very much. Yeah. The only way to save them would be for most of those of German descent, to settle in a part of today's national territory where they would probably develop into an independent little Germany. That is hardly possible and probably not desirable either. There, he's showing his true colours there. I disagree with him. I think it is. He's saying it's hardly possible. I think it is unavoidable, and he's saying it's probably not desirable. I think it is extremely desirable. I think that is how this problem, the problems of the invasion and multiculturalism, will get solved. Because what I think will happen is that the state authority will break down, partly under the pressure of this very hostile invasion and the growth of the rapid growth in numbers, this exponential curve, which I've tried to just extend a little bit into the future, just 5 years into the future, to give you some really quite astonishing numbers. I think that is that on its own could break down the German state, because when you have such a large proportion of the population made up of hostile minority, and when that hostile minority are so increasingly so confident and aggressive, that could break society. If you add into that the levels of debt within Western society, which make the economy look like an upside down pyramid, certainly a very unstable equilibrium, then I don't see how the system, how the state system survives. I think it will break down. But particularly if you then add into it the fact that the only reason that most of the indigenous population are putting up with it and accepting the authority of their governments, whom they despise, is because they're getting basic free goodies, free medical care. Then I think it's unavoidable that the state systems will break down. When that happens, I think it won't be that German people say, should we group together as a little Germany? They'll say we have to group together as a little Germany because that's the only way we can be safe. We have to get away from the invader populations. The state has broken down. They're off the leash. They can't stand us. Their aggression has turned to outright violence and war. We have to get away from that in order to create some safety for ourselves. Then I think you'll get areas like little Germany in Germany, little France in France, and little England in England, probably without the state, ruled by a do-it-yourself, vote with your feet form of law that you just join like joining a club, without the coercive state authority. I think that in turn will lead to very much greater prosperity as compared to the areas outside little Germany, the invader areas, which will quickly plummet into extreme poverty, and it'll be very easy for little Germany to expand and just buy up the invader areas. And I think the invaders will be quite keen to go in those circumstances. So I think this writer is writing as if he's making the assumption that the civil system that we have at the moment will continue indefinitely. It won't. Okay. Now, so that is hardly possible and probably not desirable either. Rather, the perspective of a future Germany with a very heterogeneous composition of the population, including associated problems and opportunities, is more realistic. So I think he's saying, well, there's good and bad, we'll probably just have to get used to it. And he's saying the decisive factor for the future of the state and radically changed people will not be the national question, but the social question. How can it be possible to ensure social cohesion for over 80 million people, even in economic crises and under worse economic conditions than in the past? What on earth does he mean? How can it be possible to ensure social cohesion? Where is the social cohesion now in Germany, in any Western European country? That's just, he's accepting that the system will go on forever as it is. That's why he talks, he descends into nonsense there. The first acid test, he gets a bit clearer here. I do give him this little bit of credit. I think he's sort of groping his way to saying, this I don't really know where this is going to end, but he's not spelling it out. The first acid test is already clearly emerging. Inflation, yes. The euro crash and the consequences of the sanctions against Russia form a toxic mixture that will test the country of open borders and welcome culture like never before. The outcome of this test will determine what Germany, which is becoming less and less German, can expect. It takes a lot of optimism to not be rather pessimistic in this expectation. So I think that last sentence sums it up. It takes a lot of optimism not to be rather pessimistic. Okay, well, I find it quite easy to be pessimistic. I think the solution to this, we will solve this for ourselves when the enemy state, and the state is your enemy. It wants to grind you down. It wants to squeeze you. It's hoping to buy you off with your own money by promises of free healthcare. It won't be able to maintain those promises of free healthcare indefinitely. That will break down. Then the state authority will break down. Now, I think he thinks that is unthinkable. I think most people think it is unthinkable. I think it will turn out to be a good thing. And when that happens, I think then people will rediscover what it means to be a nation. We will discover what we knew for centuries and what was seen as the height of liberal orthodoxy. People should have their homelands. I think we will rediscover that. There is nothing fascist about that. And certainly if you'd accused Woodrow Wilson of thinking, well, no one would have assumed that was a fascist idea then. It wasn't then, it isn't now. We are entitled to our national homeland where we can enjoy being ourselves and enjoying cohesion, sharing and building our own culture, which people want to do. And I think we will rediscover that when the state system breaks down, and then I think it will be quite the invader populations, I think, will suddenly find themselves no longer to engage in the parasitism that a lot of them do engage in, and will simply find their circumstances unlivable. So and in that regard, that's why I say that even if we were 10% of the population, I think we could still win if we put our mind to it. So those figures that I've gone through, where I've extended the figures at the top of this article, they don't scare me. I think we will still win. I think that is probably unavoidable, but it looks really hair-raising in the meantime. Don't you be scared by those numbers. Thank you.